Oh, got it. Hey everyone, on this episode of Coding with Kate, we are going to be talking about anatomy and physiology, specifically of the spinal cord. So this is going to be a lot of fun because we're going to be talking about the structure of the spine, the spinal cord, spinal canal, all the spinal nerves, how they work, how they send messages from your extremities and then up to the brain, etc. It's going to be a lot of fun. I will say I don't have a 3D model of the vertebrae or the spine, so we're stuck with doing 2D images, and so I'm not entirely happy about that, but we're still going to be talking about it because it's going to be very interesting to see how this information relates to the dissecting the op report and the PCS coding of a decompressive laminectomy, which is what we'll be talking about tomorrow. Woohoo! It's going to be so much fun. Okay, so to start, we want to discuss the different types of neurons that run through the spinal cord, from the brain, spinal cord, out to the extremities, because there are technically three different types. We're going to be focusing on two of them. So there are sensory neurons, also known afferent with an A. There are motor neurons, also known as efferent with an E. And then the third one are interneurons, also known as association neurons. But we aren't going to be discussing interneurons today, but I just wanted to let you know they are there. So with sensory and motor neurons, or afferent and efferent neurons, sensory neurons start in your extremities and send signals to the brain. So you can think afferent, they accept information and send it to the brain. So they sense pain, different types of touch, pressure, etc. Motor neurons start in the brain and go to your extremities. So you could think of efferent, they exit the brain. And motor neurons take signals from your brain to move your extremities by contracting the muscles. So these are the two types of neurons we are going to be talking about. These two only go from extremities up through the spinal canal to your brain. That is their only pathway. They don't go outside of the spinal canal on their way up to the brain. And a very fun little factoid about these neurons. They are very, very, very long because they want the action potential, neural impulse, electrical impulse to get to the brain as quick as possible, so they don't want to be taking their time going in between several neurons making that transaction. So if you think about it, the neurons that go from the tips of your fingers, that is one neuron that goes all the way up the arm, through the shoulder, and then into the spinal cord at that point of the spine, so in the cervical spine. That's one neuron, which is crazy because that's long. And if you think about the neurons that go down to your toes, one neuron goes from the tips of your toes, up your leg, to your hip, and then go right into the spinal cord at the sacral or lumbar section of the spinal cord. That's really long. That's like 2-3 feet long, depending on how tall you are. And then, at that point, you have another neuron that goes from that point of the spinal cord up the spine and then to the brain. So if we think about it, in our body, sensory or afferent neurons, there is one going from extremity to spinal cord, and then another one spinal cord up to the brain, where it goes to the gatekeeper of the thalamus. And then you have a third neuron from the thalamus to whatever portion of the brain that is going to receive or perceive that information. With your motor or your efferent neurons, there are two neurons. One from the part of your brain that makes the decision to move a part of the body Goes from the brain down the spinal cord to whatever point that extremity is at. And your second neuron is from that point of the spine out to the extremity. Two neurons. So there are 3 sensory neurons and 2 motor neurons. Really cool. Okay, so here we have our vertebrae. And we need to see some of the different landmarks of each vertebrae so we can understand how they pile up and where the neurons go into the spinal cord. And first we need to know that the end that has the kind of tail, that spiky thing that sticks out, that is the dorsal side. The dorsal side is the back or posterior. And then the vertebral body, this big fat thing here, this flat piece is the ventral side, which is your anterior side. So this side faces the front. So this is our orientation. So this would be our aerial view looking down through someone's head, down through their spine. The back and the front. This would also mean that this is our left side and this is our right side. Now when we're looking at in between the bony parts of the vertebrae, there will be a space right in the middle here, and that's for your spinal cord, spinal canal. And in our spinal cord, we have the columns. So these are all spinal columns. In this image, it's a light gray color. And then this dark space in between, so what I'm coloring in blue, those are the horns. They're called horns because they kind of look like horns. Also know that the columns are fatty, meaning they are myelinated, so that means that is the axon of our neurons. And the horns are the synapses. So that's where 2 neurons will connect. So you'd have your synaptic knobs and the synapses in the blue part in your horns. And all of the fatty gray matter is your myelin of the axons. So all of your axons are going to be in the columns, all of your synaptic knobs and synapses, synaptic cleft, will be in your horns. Then we can move on to where the stuff juts out. Once we get out to these lines that come out and that go into this really fat piece here, these are going to be all of your neurons that go from spinal cord out to the extremities. So the big fat purple thing is the spinal nerve. So now that we know the landmarks of our vertebrae of the spinal cord, we can look at the different pathways. So remember when I was talking about the afferent with an A and efferent with an E classes of neurons? They're going in different directions, meaning they have different pathways from extremity to spinal cord to brain, or brain to spinal cord to extremities. So one of those pathways is the Corticospinal Pathway. So the Corticospinal Pathway is for efferent neurons with an E, or motor neurons. So they are going from the brain down the spinal cord to the extremity to contract a muscle and make an extremity move. Starts in the brain, goes to, I think it's near the brain stem-ish, that kind of area, which is your medullary pyramid. You can go online, Google more about that. But the neuron goes through there, decussates, meaning it goes from the right side to the left side. It crosses over, that is what decussation means, going from one side of the body to the next. And from that decussation, from right to the left, it goes down the spinal cord on the left side, which means the axons are the column. So it goes down the column of the spinal cord. So in that gray fatty area, all those axons create that column. And it goes to the ventral, or the anterior side of the spinal column. So on the anterior side of those horns, the anterior column of the spinal cord. And from there, it synapses in the horns to the lower motor neuron that goes through our spinal nerve, which is also on the anterior side of the spinal nerve. That is your corticospinal pathway. And the next pathway that we need to talk about is the somatosensory pathway. And this one is with your afferent neurons, with an A, or your sensory neurons. We start with the neuron starting in whatever extremity. And this is your primary afferent neuron. And it goes on the dorsal or posterior side of the spinal nerve, along the posterior side of the spinal canal, spinal column, into the horn, where it synapses with a secondary afferent neuron. At this point, it decussates to the other side of the spinal cord and goes up that spinal column to the thalamus of the brain. Now, once it gets to the thalamus, it synapses with a tertiary neuron that takes it to whatever lobe of the brain that will be perceiving that sensory stimuli. And that is our somatosensory pathway through the spinal cord. Now you're probably wondering, Kate, why is this important? Why do I need to know the setup of the spinal cord, where the neurons go, what they're called, what pathways they have? Well, the vertebrae is what protects the spinal cord, because you have millions of these axons running through it that are very delicate, and they're all compacted together, and then they come out the little holes of the vertebrae and out into the extremities, the chest, etc. And if there's any damage on those axons of those neurons, especially in the spinal cord, they cannot regenerate, so they need to be protected. And in some spinal cord injuries or diseases, etc., or malformations of the vertebrae, that can cause pressure on those axons, which can block action potentials, neural impulses, electrical impulses from flowing through to the extremity to the brain, or brain to the extremity, either way. Or it can be causing pressure that is actually causing them to fire more, which is where you get a lot of that nerve pain, things like that, if you have a pinched nerve. Go online, Google that, make sure I'm correct in that. The physiology of a pinched nerve. Let's see if my guess is correct on that one. But when you have those sorts of issues that are causing pressure or occlusion of an axon of a neuron, you're not getting the messages to the brain or to your body, and that can cause issues with your overall functioning, especially if it's on the afferent neurons going up to your brain, because if the neural impulses aren't making their way all the way up to the brain, it's as if it never happened. If you didn't see whatever stimuli that stimulated that neuron, but you have a occlusion of sorts on that nerve in your spinal cord, that stimuli never made it to your brain, so your brain thinks it never happened. So you can have some issues with that, especially if you are blind or hard of hearing, so you don't have any other way of sensing that stimuli if you do have an occlusion of a spinal nerve. So you have all these other issues that can be caused from just pressure on the spinal nerve. Which brings us into the next video that we'll be seeing tomorrow, which is a dissecting the upper port of a decompressive laminectomy. And if you can already start to infer what that means, decompressive laminectomy, we are talking about decompressing a compressed nerve, because the lamina or laminae are layers of gray matter which are in the columns, which mean they're axons of the spinal cord. So tomorrow we will be dissecting an upper port for that procedure, and we'll go in depth on what that procedure looks like, etc., so we can understand what that procedure actually is and what its outcomes will be. But understanding the anatomy of the spinal cord and how neurons move and send impulses to and from the brain to the extremities, etc., then we can understand why this procedure is necessary. So it'll be very fun. So subscribe to this channel if you want to see the next video of dissecting the upper port, and also other videos on ICD-10-CM, ICD-10-PCS, CPT, and other A&P videos. You will get notifications on all the videos that I post, so you're always in the know. You can comment below if you found this video of the spinal cord interesting. If there are other aspects of it you'd like me to expand on, let me know in those comments. If you have ideas of any other topics outside of the spinal cord, so any other body system, body parts, let me know. You can like this video as well to let me know you enjoyed it. I love that feedback. And I will see y'all later. Bye!